Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining and the wind is at your back. I hope you are in the mood for an epic show today because that's what I've got for you. I have the one and only Garyth Moxey with me today, and it is an honor and a privilege to introduce him. He's a luminary in the field of entheogen provision and harm reduction advocacy based in Vancouver, British Columbia. Garyth stands at the forefront of psychedelic therapy, armed with a profound commitment to education, healing, and transformation. Garyth's journey is one of relentless dedication and growth. Trained as a psychedelic therapist at the prestigious Synthesis Institute, he has become a beacon of hope for many, specializing in the application of Ibogaine for addiction detoxification, particularly for opiate addiction. His expertise extends to the realms of 5-MeO-DMT and Psilocybin, substances he employs to facilitate deep psychospiritual exploration. With decades of experience and rigorous training, including certifications from the Orenda Institute and the F.I.V.E. education program at Tandava Retreats in Mexico, Garyth is a master in guiding individuals to transformative journeys of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. His work transcends the clinical. It is deeply rooted in advocacy and awareness, raising within the psychedelic community. Garyth has been instrumental in documentary projects like Dosed, which illuminate the profound healing potential for psychedelic medicines. Beyond his psychedelic therapy work, Garyth is also a passionate advocate for medical cannabis, producing high-grade cannabis oil tailored to the specific needs of his clients. His extensive knowledge of cultivation and extraction techniques ensures the highest quality of medicinal products. Together with his partner Blair and their beloved canine companion Millie, Garyth continues to create holistic healing experiences in Vancouver. Their offerings include comprehensive Ibogaine and Iboga treatments, psilocybin therapy, and 5-MeO-DMT sessions, empowering individuals to embark on a profound journey of healing, transformation, and self-discovery. Garyth, thank you for being here today. How are you?
Thank you so much. That was such a wondrous introduction there. I'm doing very well. Yeah, thank you so much, George. And a pleasure for me to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me. That's
Yeah, I'm
great.
excited
Thank
to
you.
have you. I think you've been inviting people all over the world for quite some time to find alternative methods of healing. Have you always been a person that's inviting people to help, or have you always been that kind of individual that's looking to figure out a better way?
Um, in some ways, I guess there's a part of me that's been involved in that. Um, I come from a long history of psychedelics. When I was younger, I used to live close to Stonehenge um,
Ah,
in the UK. And in the 70s and 80s, there was a free festival that used to happen at Stonehenge. And that used to run for the whole of June. And back then, there was a hard kind of core group that were the main part of the festival movement. In some ways, you could consider it kind of similar to the Dead scene,
mm-hmm.
and the Grateful Dead.
Yep.
Like we all lived in buses and trucks and trailers and stuff, and traveled in big groups around the country, in a very similar kind of way. We weren't following a band per se, but we were a psychedelic movement, and if you wanted to find some LSD, then you went and saw that crowd, which is the same as
Right.
the dead scene. So at a young age, I only lived like 40 miles away. So even at 16, we would shoot on up to Stonehenge and score ourselves some black hash and a bunch of microdot LSD or something or other. And so that was my introduction to psychedelics back then. And things were quite a little bit different in Britain then. Um, the festival scene kind of grew out in the late 60s, early 70s, the free festival scene. And in Britain, the police don't have guns. And so it's a much more level playing field when it comes to interactions with the police and stuff. And so there was a big free festival movement, and there was no organization behind that. We would show up on common land, a kind of a rough roadway or a drag would be made out of vehicles. There would be a stage, and then people would come. and bands would play on the stage, and we would be kind of the infrastructure that sold, veggie curry and rice and hash and LSD and stuff, and we were allowed to do that is because the police just didn't ever come on to free festival sites or anything like that. So there was a level of freedom that I got to experience in my younger years, and during that time, I'd helped some people through some difficult psychedelic experiences. So yeah, that's kind of in one of the reasons why we the work that we do is something of a vocation, you know, and
Yeah.
it's psychedelics are a way for people to really kind of find a truer part of themselves. When I was 16, I was supposed to go and become a dairy farm manager and work on dairy farms and fit into the system and stuff like that. And that really wasn't my path. And the first dose of mushrooms or LSD kind of very quickly took me off on a different path. So the whole psychedelic thing, I think most of my major decisions in my life have been made whilst I've been in a psychedelic state, because I feel I'm moving more from my heart, in that respect. So the psychedelics have been a big influence, I guess I could say, in my life, and have been an important part of it. So yeah.
It's always mesmerizing to me to get to hear a little bit of the journey of the individual with whom I'm speaking. And when I hear terms like freedom or the psychedelic experience shattered my idea of what I was supposed to be, or knowing more, like, it seems to me like that is sort of at the root of so much mental anguish. Like, so many of us, maybe not till later in life, get to have that experience. We're like, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be doing this. No wonder I'm so unhappy in my life.
Sure.
That seems like a thread that kind of runs through that particular Ariadne maze.
Yeah, it's like sometimes people get the realization that they've had their ladder leaning up against the wrong wall.
So true. So true.
And some changes need to be made. So
Yeah. And when they're not made, it just stacks up. Like, the more you push that kind of stuff down, the more it begins to bulge out in different areas, whether it's
yeah.
maybe your weight or your relationships or some misplaced anger. And then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
you're looking over the wrong wall.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Well, it's a way of people finding themselves, or a deeper part of themselves and connecting with that. I think that's an important thing. I mean, psychedelics aren't for everybody,
Right.
but in some respects, I feel that for those who they could serve well, it's kind of a birthright, that you should be able to take these substances in the right settings
Yeah.
as well. Of course, when I was taking them as a youngster, I mean, I took them in all the wrong settings. And the way that we do things now are quite different than we used to when we were younger. But,
Yeah, sometimes I wonder, is it all medicinal? Because it does seem like use at an earlier age on some level is the forerunners into maybe finding the right path, on
yeah,
some
yeah,
level.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was just about to say something about that, and it drifted away. And I'm having a senior moment. um, but yeah, I mean, people have a better understanding of themselves and also the world
Yeah.
that they live in. You know,
Yeah,
so yeah, and I think, well, as you get older, they can mean different things,
sure.
and it's really also the intention behind it. I was involved in Burning Man 20 years ago, and that could be considered a much more of a recreational
Sure.
scene. But for me, it was very important as part of my newfound sobriety. I recovered from alcohol with LSD. Almost, it will be 24 years ago this August.
Wow. Congratulations.
No, thank you. Well, I was retreading in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and uh, yeah, it was extremely important to me. I mean, I was doing everything I could at the time to kind of stay sober, and doing traditional things was what I thought was the best thing to do. Um, and I think that all recovery has some uses. I've done time in traditional rehab and stuff, and at the time I thought, well, that was a fucking waste of time, but actually it wasn't. I mean, they're all building steps to getting where we want to go to. Or so. Yeah. Uh, the LSD was a very important thing for me, and a lot of the things that I learned in AA or in recovery and stuff, I just couldn't implement. I just
Hmm.
couldn't put them in place. And a lot of people speak about this, like they can get all the theoretical stuff, but it's feeling it, and in the LSD journey, it was like the penny dropped, and I got the message then that life would just be awesome if it was very simple, just don't drink. And I'd been told that in AA as well by old timers saying, oh, Gareth, if you don't drink you can't get drunk. And back then I was like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, fucking wise words. And then later, after the LSD experience, I mean, it just kind of, a lot of those lessons were kind of dropped into a more of a heartfelt space. And then I just didn't want to keep on doing what I was doing, which was self harm, really, in many respects. That's what a lot of drug use is. So,
That's so well said. It's so difficult to have something become heartfelt unless you can experience it from an altered state of awareness, because
right,
that's so well put. I was going to ask the question, like, what was different between the traditional model versus using the LSD model? But I think that explains it well, and it gives you empathy with other people to know they can hear it but they can't feel it. Like, that's amazing.
right. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I mean, we work with a lot of people that system has kind of failed them, or
Yep.
and myself personally, that was something I had to get away from, and that was big part of the message was, oh, Gareth, you've got to stop hanging out with those people, because I don't believe that I had a disease. And then standing up, sometimes 3 times a day, standing up and say, hi, I'm Gareth and I'm an alcoholic, a drug addict, and all of the above. I don't think that that's conducive to healing, or it certainly wasn't for me. Identifying like that,
Yeah.
saying, oh, I am an alcoholic and I am a drug addict. I'm not trying to downplay people's
Right.
experiences in alcohol use disorder or addiction, but that's not exactly who they are. I mean? They're suffering
Yep.
from an affliction at that time, but I don't think it's a disease model. Like most people don't get a bunch of insights and get up and walk away from cancer, So if people get a bunch of insights through their addiction, or not, sometimes, and I've known a friend of mine was addicted to heroin, and he went to this treatment center, that treatment center, the other one, and and then he hit like 38 or something. And went, oh yeah, I think I'm done. His family are like, finally, after God knows how much money, but it was almost again like the penny dropped, and he went,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm done with that. So,
Yeah. It,
so yeah, I mean, um, yeah, to continuously identify with the fact that you have a disease and you're defective and stuff, I don't think that that's helpful in the bigger picture. Now, if that's what people need in order to stay sober, then have at it. I just don't think that's the thing for everybody. And it's a very old institution now. It's almost 100 years old. And I knew about what they wanted to do with that Bill wanted,
right.
because of Weyburn in Saskatchewan. They were using LSD in the 1950s with a 45% success rate of total abstinence with 1 or 2 sittings of LSD, which, of course, there's no medical value to LSD. And there were hundreds and hundreds of papers written on LSD in the 50s, so I knew all about that. And I'd had about 6 months sober, but that was my MO. I would stay sober for 6 months, and then I would get some weird idea that I could drink a beer or something, and I would do that, and then I'd be drunk for another 6 months, and everything would be back in the toilet, and then I'd come crawling back 6 months later, and hi, a newcomer again, and everybody's like, oh yeah, I've been waiting for you. So yeah.
It's so interesting to see that pattern. When you get up and you identify as something, you have this negative feedback loop, and those
Yeah.
vibrations or those thoughts or those things corrode the container. So when you get
Yeah.
up and you repeat that thing, and there's no wonder
Yeah.
you come back in 6 months. Like you've already
Yeah.
programmed yourself to come back in those 6
Yeah.
months,
Yeah. So, but it wasn't working. Do you know
right?
what I mean? It just wasn't. It wasn't the penny wasn't dropping, and that was the big message that I got from the LSD that time was, oh, you got to stop hanging out with those people,
Mm-hmm.
and go and find life. And actually, I did. I got involved with Burning Man, which is what most people wouldn't
Right.
consider the smartest thing to do, in recovery, but actually it was. It was
Yeah.
engaging with my people and art and stuff, and then I quit drinking.
Yeah.
And Burning Man or re-engaging in life was a big part of being able to do that, and then also some psychedelic use. You know. A bit more responsibly than when I was in my 20s in the UK. We used to take LSD so as that we could be out all night selling more LSD on the main drag. And do you know what I mean? So we used to take it a lot back then. And this was before MDMA came on the scene as well. So if you went to festivals back in the day, then you took LSD. That's what everybody did. There was all these different types of LSD and stuff like that. So it's quite prominent back then as well.
Yeah. What is your
Mm.
relationship with it now?
I really like it. I really like LSD, and I haven't taken it in be 3 years this summer because we've just been too busy,
Right.
and so I'm trying to coordinate with some friends that we're going to get
Sure.
together and do some LSD sometime this summer. But it's just been a busy summer, and which is yeah, that's just me probably not taking as much care about myself as I should. I should be allocating a little bit of time and saying, okay, no, that weekend has been put aside for LSD, and I just find it a real how can I put it? It's just a deeper check in with myself,
Yeah.
and I haven't had a chance to do that with LSD in a long time. So that's kind of my relation. I do have a relationship where I'm trying to have a relationship with it. I'm just trying to find the time. I
I
work
know.
more often with 5-MeO on a personal level. I find that gets in there. Well, like we get a lot of vicarious trauma through the phone calls, if not even the phone calls with the people that are in addiction, but the phone calls with the parents of the people that are in addiction. So I find that I get this kind of almost like kryptonite or something or
Yeah.
other gets on me, and for want of a better word, and then when I work with the 5-MeO DMT personally, then it's like a psychic shower which cleanses that off and kind of gives me a bit of a reboot. And the the timeline for that is a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
LSD is normally like 12 hours,
Right.
and then it's a couple of days
Mm.
to kind of come back from that, whereas the 5-MeO is I'll be in for like an hour or so, and then I'm out, and then I sit for my mentor, and then we'll chit chat for a while, and then I'll get in the car and drive back to Vancouver. So it's kind of an afternoon thing, and I think that probably serves that purpose just as well. Maybe not in some ways even better, just because of the nature of the 5-MeO work.
Yeah.
So they're quite different signatures. They're deep journeys within the psyche, but the signature is a little bit different.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that you sort of get the kryptonite on you. Like you can't be in surgery without getting blood on you. You know what I
Right.
mean by that? And like
Yeah.
it's just part of it, I think. And
Yeah.
it takes it seems to me, I don't work in any of a rich I don't work in any of the fields where I'm guiding people through difficult situations, but it seems like it takes a certain type of individual to do that, and not only do it once or twice, but continue to do it? Like, what is it that drives you to continue to be on that path?
Well, I spent so long on a shitty path
Yeah, I
in
know.
addiction, you know. So you know that when you trace it back and look back at it, I mean, you know, a lot of my addiction started at a very young age, you know, so it's an integral part of me. Whether that was, you know, as far as back as I can remember, living in Quebec, you know, I'd get home, and if my mum wasn't around or couldn't catch me, there was always these Macintosh apples in the fridge. You know, I'd get into them and I'd eat two or three, and my stomach would be like, oh, and then I'd be and it would hurt my stomach, but I just couldn't help myself. And it was the same with honeycomb fucking cereal, you know, and I'd eat so much of that stuff that it made the roof of your mouth raw, you know, and so those are just consequences of so it's always been there in one way,
Yeah,
form or another. I'm neurodivergent, I have ADHD, so again, that's a, you know, being dopamine deficient. I understand why I was being dragged into that kind of thing, that dopamine thing. So it was a long time, and it really affected my life and all my relationships and stuff. And so when you find something that that a tool that somebody else can use, because they're the ones that do the
yep,
work, not
yep,
us. We set the stage and we're the support team. The people that are doing the medicine work are doing the work.
yeah.
So, but when I found a formula, um, for this, and you know, there wasn't really anything more important. There couldn't be anything more important. You know, I got sober at 35, and the most important thing to me at that time was staying sober, and actually to making it to 35 was a pat on the back, and not really having or where I should be in life, you know, in terms of material
Mm,
possessions and equity and things like that. None of that shit ever mattered. And now just being alive, you know, when the odds were that I maybe shouldn't be, now I just want to kind of continue that work as a vocation. You know, Blair and I, it's not easy, and there's some, you know, it's always a bit of a winding road and ups and downs and finances and stuff like that. Now there's so many more people being involved in medicine work as well, so it's not easy, but then I couldn't imagine ourselves doing anything else somehow. And so it is kind of like a vocation, you know. And so, and we, like I was saying, we don't do a lot of the hard work. What we do is we
right.
set the stage, and it's the people that come and that take the compounds are the ones that are doing the real hard stuff. And like I say, we're Houston or something, you know, should there be
Right.
anything go awry or anything like that. And then we're the support for people afterwards as well. But when people are coming in for opiate detoxes, they normally stay with us for 2 weeks. And we're just kind of like a private residence, and we work with one or two people at a time. And so we have active people in addiction come in and stay with us, which is in some respects easier than people that work in rehabs and stuff, because we have medicine on our side and those people don't, you know. So in some ways the work that we do is eased a little bit by the medicine that we're doing, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the idea of a lot of people seem to be moving into or attempting to use different types of plant medicines and entheogens and psychedelics to help people now. And
Yeah,
it's you've been around for quite some time. Do you think that this particular wave of plant medicine is similar to the last wave of plant medicine in the medical
we
container? What do you
you
think?
kind of like the wave of the 60s and
Yeah,
70s.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's following a similar
Oh,
pattern?
it's a little bit different as it's more legit, you know. It's
Hmm.
more legitimate now. um So, and I don't think it's having quite the cultural shift that the
Mm,
60s did. I mean, you only got to look at the early pictures of the Beatles and then
Yeah.
Sergeant Pepper's, and you can
Yeah.
see what 4 years of LSD did to culture, right? So I don't think we're having any kind of a shift like that culturally. Um, and then that's also when a lot of psychedelic stuff was shut down,
Right.
because they were doing an awful lot of stuff with LSD in the 50s and the 60s. And then once the genie got out of the bottle, by
Mm-hmm.
1970, they shut it all down. So I think there's been quite a bit of hype around this, and there's this kind of like panacea or magic bullet kind of thing that came because there's corporate interest in this now,
Huge.
and it's a little bit different. So I think there's been a bit more of an emphasis on training. And
Mm.
I took advantage of that as well. I mean, I went and trained with Ibogaine with some people that were serving Ibogaine, and so I went and spent, I think, 7 weeks with those guys, and they taught me the rudiments of working with Ibogaine, and we did a bunch of different treatments and stuff. But now I think even though there's quite a lot of training programs out there, there's also people that are just picking it up, you know.
Yeah.
And now suddenly they're 5-MeO shamans or something. I'm like, oh God,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel fortunate that we've been able to do some of these courses. It's an investment in ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and also an investment in the movement
Yeah.
itself. We don't want to have negative stories coming out of the psychedelic um, world. Of course, we're going to, because we're all humans.
Yeah.
And there has been some negative stuff coming out, like in the MDMA trials here
Right.
in Canada, and you know, and every now and again you hear of some practitioner, with a god complex going off the deep end or something or other, and smoking too much 5-MeO, or so I would like to see some kind of standards, but at the same time, it's a multidisciplinary
Right.
world that we live in, and so yeah, it's a different from that time in the 60s, because all of the academic stuff just got shut down. And then you couldn't get LSD. But at 16, I could get LSD by going to Stonehenge. And I
Right.
could probably get 20 different types of LSD back then as well. There was so much of it, you know. And it's the same now with, like MDMA. Actually, now here in Canada, they're allowing exemptions for certain people to take MDMA and stuff, but there isn't one for Ibogaine.
Mm.
So, so it's important that I think a certain amount of standards are going into a container where we're holding people through a very vulnerable uh, expedition, or however you'd like to call it. But that's a vulnerable time for that person, and they need to be supported and held in the best possible ways. Which is quite different from, I used to sell LSD to anybody that had £2.50. Now there's
Right.
this huge screening thing that happens, and you know what are they going to go home to, and so it's all of this. Now it's quite a different thing, where it was £2.50, there you go. And so, but then also that has its place as well. The intention is
Yeah.
to use LSD recreationally, and listen to your favorite band, and hang out with your
Yep.
friends and have a really good time. Well, that's spiritually uplifting thing to do.
Yep.
So it's really the intention and stuff behind the work.
Sometimes I wonder. Sometimes I wonder when I look at like some of these trials where there's been, you know, where there's been some inappropriate behavior in relationships, and it makes me wonder, when you sit with someone that takes a large dose of whether it's MDMA or it's psychedelics or entheogens. I think that has a radical effect on the facilitator as well. Like, we know, and you can't really measure that, but if someone is going into a state to heal themselves that may have had sexual trauma, and the facilitator on some level is unhappy in their relationships or has something else going on in their life, that
Yeah.
person that takes the psychedelic is radically going to affect the facilitator in ways that they might not be able to imagine on some level. Do you think that's
Yeah.
fair to say?
Yeah, I can think that kind of thing happens, and that, and that's why facilitators have to check themselves on a regular basis.
Right.
You know. So, but yeah, you can be affected. There can be a transference and stuff going on, as those altered states, as people are going through those altered states, But then, that's also very important that, facilitators have a good understanding of what they're doing.
Right.
So, you know what I mean, or what they're holding, what they're supporting, you know. And I think that maybe sometimes the people that are stepping into the field without some kind of formal education don't really understand that bit. There's a little bit difference between somebody who's just sitting for somebody and supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
I feel, a sitter might not be trauma informed, do you know what I mean? In
Yeah.
some respects, I feel that it's good that people can be supported in some ways,
Yep.
but it's got to be done right. I feel, and
Yeah.
with integrity as well, and not, with some nefarious ideas that the practitioner might have. I mean, we hear war stories all the time, about weird stuff that's happening in such and such, or this happened at so and so, or this shaman behaved this way
Mm-hmm.
in Peru. So we're all humans at the end of the day,
Yep.
and yeah, humans can make some pretty large mistakes.
Yeah, it's true. It's if I mix it up into a different type of question, do you think that the altered states of awareness that one can find themselves in, these altered sort of environments, what is it like? It really changes our relationships to our social roles, and like that can be very damaging to society if people have these preconceived notions, especially authority figures have these ideas of how society should work, and then someone comes back from the well with this water and tries to bring it to the community, like, hey, look at this, look at me now, like that. It has a radical way of dissolving boundaries. And do you think that
Mm.
radical shift is something that maybe people are afraid of in the bigger community?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, in some ways, I mean, like the 60s and 70s, like shake things up on a
Yeah.
society,
Right.
and then, there was things like Black Panthers and
Right.
Weather Underground and stuff, which is kind of radicalized out of a situation,
Yeah.
So I think that newfound consciousness back then was more radical, and we're not
Right.
quite seeing quite so much of that now. But sorry, where were we going with that again?
Well, I feel like I guess another question is, while we haven't seen the radical cultural shifts yet,
Yeah,
might we be in the late 50s, and like we are on the cusp of the radical change? If you look at maybe what's happening in colleges, you almost had a Kent State with some like the things that were happening there, like
yeah,
maybe it's bubbling up. And when you look at
yeah.
like Lycos and MAPS being denied this thing, might
Mm.
this be a pathway out of the medical container into a larger community? Like people are like, you know what, it's not going to work. Let's just do it. Let's just do it the Leary way.
Well, I think there's a certain percentage of the population are afraid of that, and they were like, now we've got people smoking cannabis that because there's cannabis stores.
Yeah.
They might not have been doing it when there are dispensaries, but now in Vancouver we have cannabis stores. So
Right.
people are like, and a lot of older people are starting to try gummies and things like
Yep.
that. But with the psychedelics, it's also happening. People are coming to us now because there's more of this stuff going on, and they did that in the 60s, but now they would like to come and do it in a bit more of a contained
Right.
space. But I think some people are still, psychedelics were given such a bad rap during the 60s and the 70s. You know, a lot of public service announcements. People thought their chromosomes were going to change, and you take LSD, you're going to jump off of a building, and all
Right.
kind of weird shit like this. So I think that kind of stigma has had a bit of an overall effect on society. Like they first got in with psilocybin because nobody knew what the fuck psilocybin was. They everybody knew what LSD was, but psilocybin, it's the way it's spelt and everything. So I think it kind of came in around the back door just through,
Yeah.
you know, people's ignorance at the FDA or whatever. So, but whether we're going to see a shift again like that or some kind of a shift, I don't know. The green movement was kind of born out of the psychedelic movement, I feel, and because when people do psychedelics, then they're more, they think about nature more and things like that, and so. But generally speaking, I don't know if it is having that much of a shift. People are still incredibly greedy,
Mm.
and I know people in the psychedelic state that psychedelic space that are just assholes, really, self-serving. So, do you know what I mean?
Yep.
It's an interesting thing, I don't know if it's going to have effect on society in the way that it did before. And we all thought it was, we were like, oh, there's going to be this huge, resurgence of psychedelics and everybody's going to be finding themselves. And, it hasn't worked out like that so far. And synthesis almost went under as well. They
Mm.
almost went bankrupt, and they were like the, the gold standard, And there again, they tried to extend too much and probably looking at getting too big. And do you know what I mean? It's so I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that
Me too.
it's in that the whole thing that's happened just with MAPS or Lycos or an MDMA. Well, I'm not overly surprised there. You know,
Mm.
given what kind of happened with the rollout and the trials
Yeah.
and things like that. So and then also some of these ketamine clinics are. It's all done by Zoom. You get your lozenges, and then you
Yep.
connect with us by Zoom or something, and it's all kind of like do it at home. And I don't know if I agree with that, you know, really. But then again, it's also making things cost effective,
Mm.
So how much is it going to cost an insurance company for two qualified therapists and a 10-hour MDMA session? I think they would rather just pay for antidepressants
Yep.
or something,
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how it's going to unfold. I like the idea that every big city would have, psychedelic a place where you could go and take psychedelics and explore your own consciousness, as is your birthright. So it should be able to be done in a safe place. You know, but unfortunately, at the moment, it's not reaching all of the people that it should be reaching. You know, so and that's because of things like the FDA. Turning down the application for MDMA therapy, and then how many veterans are killing themselves daily? You know,
Yep.
and then there's 100 overdose deaths a day in America from fentanyl. We have 8 a day in BC. Four in Vancouver and four out throughout the rest of the province. And Ibogaine's not even being spoken about. So, so we're a long ways off in some respects. You know, the veterans are still killing themselves from their PTSD, and yeah, so it's a bit of a long road.
Yeah.
And we always want things to change like that. I thought weed was going to be legal by the time I was 25, and of course, Britain will be the last place on the planet where you can allow legal cannabis. So, yeah, it's going to be a long road, and it's not going to be quite as we had imagined, I think. But I think that we're progressively moving forward if people are going to be able to find this space, or you can go and get mushrooms downtown now. That's the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah.
So, it's the drug war has been a colossal failure, and if anything, it's made everything much worse. You know, so And to think that you would be able to keep drugs out of the hands of people in a capitalist society, you can't keep drugs out of high security prisons.
Yeah.
Drugs are a currency in there, you know. So how will we expect to keep it out of the free world? It's ridiculous, you know. So what is the drug war going to be replaced with? Is I feel is important. You know, how are we going to dismantle this and have drug peace instead of a
Mm.
drug war? You know, the people are dying of fentanyl. Well, that's because of the drug war and the capitalist society that we live in. Somebody could send like 5 grams of pure fentanyl through the mail from China to Canada, and then some gangster is going to make that up into a kilo of dope in his bathtub or whatever, you know, with his Vitamix. I don't know how they
Yeah.
do it, but they do. And then they knock out pills. And so the drug war just means that drugs are, you go to downtown Vancouver, it's a free for all. I can get as much methamphetamine, crack cocaine, or opiates as I want. There's nothing standing in the way of me doing it, and there's nothing standing in the way of a 14-year-old kid doing it as well. So I think what, you know, the way that we've looked upon the drug war really is kind of like humanity's self-inflicted wound. I see that their intentions in the beginning why they did that, but if we'd had heroin dispensaries here in Vancouver 15 years ago, we wouldn't be losing 8 people a day in the province. You know, heroin's quite a benign substance to somebody who's been using it for a
Right.
long time, and what kills people is the variation in the strength of the gangster controlled narcotics, and that's why we lose fucking kids in Starbucks bathrooms and stuff.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
It's. I'm hopeful that the drug war seems to me don't do their drugs, do our drugs. You know what I
yeah, oh
mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah, sure,
it's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
crazy to think about, but
yeah, yeah,
on some level, um, Iboga has begun to make its way into the lexicon. I know in Kentucky they've been having a lot of. My friend Doc Askins has been working and did a podcast recently with some people in Kentucky that are using it to really help people, veterans especially with addiction and stuff like that. Is that
yeah.
is how do you feel? Is Iboga something new that you've been working with over the last 5 or 7 years or recently, or what's the relationship with that
No,
for you?
um I when I recovered from alcohol with LSD, that was when I kind of 24 years ago was when I was
Ah,
going like this on the internet, ding, 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 ding. Because a friend of mine had an Apple computer, and that was the way I got on there. And so then I looked up psychedelic recovery, and uh, and that's when I found Ibogaine. I mean, I'd known about Iboga since I was 16, because after a
ah,
huge mushroom journey, I got this book called Plants of the Gods, which is a book by Albert Hoffman and
mhm.
Schultes, I believe. And so that goes through all of the psychedelics around the world. And I got that at a young age. So I found out about Iboga at a very young age. And it was on my to-do list, you know, my bucket
Sure,
list, you know.
sure.
That sounds really interesting. I'd love to do that one day. And so after the LSD journey, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to Canada because I'm Canadian by birth, English parents. I'm going to go to Canada and I'm going to open an Ibogaine clinic. And that was like 23 years
Wow.
ago or something or other.
Wow.
And then a mutual friend of mine, um, through that I knew through Alcoholics Anonymous. Actually, he was going to be my sponsor, but he started drinking ayahuasca and then came to me and said, Gareth, I'm sorry I can't be your sponsor anymore because I started drinking ayahuasca and I'm out of here. So, and then and then I and then I did LSD a couple of weeks later and I was like, yeah, I'm out of here too. But we had a mutual friend who I was going to ask to be my sponsor at one time, and his name is Rocky Caravelli, and he'd be somebody interesting to
I would
get on.
love to. I'd love to.
Yeah, I'll put you two
Okay,
together.
please.
And anyhow, so I learned all about Ibogaine on the internet, and then my friend Chris said to me, he said, "Oh, Rocky's had a relapse, you know, relapse on opiates and methamphetamine," and I was like, "Oh, he needs to do Ibogaine," and he's like, what's that?" And then I explained it to him, and then he went to Rocky and explained it all to him, and then Rocky looked it up, And then Rocky saved money and went and got a treatment like 6 months later down in Mexico. And Rocky and his ex-wife run Awakening in the Dream House. They're in San Miguel now. So
Nice.
yeah, so that was a early connection I had with Ibogaine, and I, you know, I was finding out through our mutual friend how his treatment went and how he was doing and stuff. So I at that point was like, oh, I'm gonna, because I was living in California illegally at the time, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to Canada. I'm gonna open an Ibogaine clinic. So it had been on my list to do list, or you know, planning to go and do this. I wasn't about to start giving LSD to people with alcohol use disorder, which I've done a bit since then, but not. I wasn't about to do that at the time. So, and I was all set to go to Canada, and I had my little truck and my little caravan and stuff, and then I met my ex-wife at a Burning Man party in San Francisco. And the whole Canada thing got put on a back burner for quite some time. We bought a 1955 school bus to drive to
Yeah.
Canada, and then we had to rebuild that and everything. So, and then when I arrived here, um, I, because I was importing my wife from the States, I had to, for tax reasons, I kind of had to have a normal job and things like that for importing her in as a resident.
Hmm.
Um, and it was during that time actually that and she was already up and everything, and I had an opiate relapse. I was just about to go to the UK, and some personal reasons, which gave me a whole bunch of stress, um, gave me back pain, and I was a painter back then. I
Mm.
had to do a bunch of baseboards, and so I got T3s from the doctor, which is the very smallest amount of opioid. There's a tiny little bit of oxycodone in there, but that started a relapse, and so within a very quick time, I was doing Dilaudid, and yeah, and then I went to the UK and took Iboga while I was there, and then that gave me all of the clarity to move forward with what I wanted to do. You know, I was still working in construction, really wanting to work with Ibogaine. You know, after recovering from alcohol use disorder with LSD, and then having this kind of opiate slip up, and then me taking Ibogaine in or Iboga in the UK kind of solidified what I really wanted to do, and it gave me the oomph to go and do it. You know, I remember I came back from Britain and I was the head painter on a big casino job, and we all got called into the office to talk about where we were and everything. And I just showed up, come back from Britain for a couple of weeks holiday, and they're all like, "Oh, welcome back," you know. And I said to them all, "Yeah, I'm not going to be here for very long. I'm going to become an Ibogaine provider, and I'm done with construction." Very seriously, and they were looking at me like, "What's that with? What is he? What's this?" Okay, very good, but let's get this job finished, you know.
Yeah.
But that's where I was. Like, I'm not going to be doing this much longer, and then it was very firm in my mind that I knew the path that I was going to head off on, and that was in August. And by February of the next year, I was being trained in Mexico to work with Ibogaine and do detoxes. So.
Is that sort of mindset, that shift in mindset that I'm not going to be doing this, is that something that you see in the patients that you help that come in with addiction or something like that?
Yeah. There's that kind of like, oh, I'm gonna make changes now. You know, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm done with that, and this is the path that I'm gonna go on. You know, that path gets a little bit, you know, that's what, and that's the intention of most people that come to work with us anyhow, is they're done with this shit and they just need to move on. But the opiates have a very strong uh, pull on people, and the withdrawals from opiates are horrendous. And then also what happens afterwards, the post-acute withdrawal syndrome, the depression, the malaise, anxiety, insomnia can go on for months. So the longer somebody's been using opiates, the longer that shit goes on. And
Yep.
so working with the Ibogaine can allow people to disconnect from that, and have the ability physically and mentally to be able to walk away from opiates, you know. So, and other drugs as well, other drugs of choice or behaviors as well, gambling, porn, shopping, stuff like that. They're all distractions. They could be looked as soft addictions. As a species, we're very much involved in self-soothing, and comfort, and you know, yeah, we do a lot of addictive things, like look at oil, for Christ's
Yeah,
sake, and what it's doing. But we all we're born into it. So
it's true.
yeah.
Do you? It's interesting to me to think about how an individual doing the work to create the best version of themselves may be the way we heal society. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of one at a time, right? It
Yeah,
really, well, I mean, people do have to work on
I
themselves in
know.
order
It's hard.
to, because then
Yeah,
it makes the world a much easier place if people have done at least a little bit of work on themselves.
yeah,
When it's all, but we're all works in progress.
right.
Like I didn't have a particularly, I had a troubling relationship with my father when he was younger.
Mm,
And then I just went back to Britain because he passed away last October. And I spent 3 weeks with him. And he's a very different person than he was when I was a kid. And I'm a very different
yeah,
person than I was when I was in my 20s and 30s. So we're all works in progress, you
yeah,
know, and so I think the work probably gets a little easier as well when we get a little older, but that just naturally happens, that we're not that we seem to get better. We hope anyhow, uh, with age, and then if we work on ourselves, and yeah, that makes life easier for ourselves as well as everybody around us.
yeah.
There's that saying that people end up in therapy because somebody didn't go to therapy. You know? So
What,
yeah.
as someone who has experience in altered states of awareness, what do you think are some of the major differences between LSD and Iboga and the effects that it's having?
Oh, they're very, very different. Very different. Like Iboga is one of the most unique experiences going, I think, for people that are used to psychedelics and had a lot of. I've tried a lot of different psychedelics. I mean, because they're all psychedelics. They all work in a certain manner, whether they're tryptamines, phenylethylamines. It's a deeper journey into your consciousness. But Iboga and Ibogaine is very unique, and their actions are very unique. It it's a classic tryptamine like LSD and DMT, but it's also a dissociative psychedelic like ketamine
Mm,
and 5-MeO, and it's also an oneric. And an oneric is like a waking dream, daydream. So the actions of itself are like very heavy daydreaming. So
mm,
it's more like going through a dream, a dreamscape, and then different stuff can arise. I'm not overly concerned about what happens during the treatment. Like when I did it,
hmm.
I totally overdosed myself with something I bought online. I thought it was 30% total alkaloid. Turned out it was 60%. So I took twice as much as I should have done, and I dosed myself high anyhow. So I kind of squeaked through. I feel that I should have died in that experience,
Mm,
but I didn't, and I made it through. But the whole experience was there's that artist Pink. She has a song called
hmm,
Razor Glass, and it's all about getting fucked
hmm.
up,
Yep.
drinking and stuff. And when the medicine started kicking in, that video started playing in my head, clear as a bell, like I was watching it
Mm,
on TV. And then it would
right.
get to the end, and then it got back to the beginning and started again. And went like this for about 15 hours as I dry heaved into a bucket. So, was that a deeply moving entheogenic experience? It was pretty horrific. But what came afterwards and the clarity that I had afterwards in the next 3 months was really that was the beauty of that experience. The time itself was. And then also some people don't remember their Ibogaine experience. Kind of like if you take too much LSD on the dance floor, you don't remember between midnight and 4. You know,
Right.
you probably had a pretty good time,
Right.
but there's a memory gap on that. And so Ibogaine can be like that. I've known people to go through a treatment and, you know, this thing overtakes them and they go through something and then as they come out the other side, they don't remember it.
Right.
Doesn't mean to say that shift hasn't changed, that there's a shift that happens, and then it's what happens over the next few months. And that's why we focus on getting loads of Ibogaine into people, because the more that they take over a period of time, the better they will feel over the next 3 months or so. And with the neuroplasticity of the brain, that's what we're looking for, is the, you know, time for those new pathways to kind of set up. And that's what it takes, is a period of time like that, you know. So it's
It,
really, it's quite different in a lot of respects from an LSD journey or other tryptamines.
true. Gareth, can I hold you over for another segment here? I know that we're coming up on an hour. How are you doing on time?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Let's take a short pause here,
yeah.
and I will for those tuning in right now, I appreciate your time. We'll take a short break and then we'll log back in and go with part 2 here coming up. So to everyone watching, thank you for hanging out. We'll be back shortly. Gareth, hang on just briefly afterwards. I want to talk to you real quickly.
Okay, sure.
Okay.